In the vast reaches of the third spiral arm of the Milky Way galaxy, the Interstellar Institute of Xenozoology floated like a gleaming jewel against the backdrop of stars. Standard year 8253 marked over 5 centuries since the founding of the Galactic Alliance, a time when scientific knowledge and space travel had reached unprecedented heights. The institute itself was a sprawling space station orbiting an ancient, dimming star, creating an environment of perpetual twilight, perfect for studying the most dangerous creatures known to sentient life. The station's massive octagonal lecture halls buzzed with the excited chatter of students from dozens of worlds. Among them sat a group that would soon find themselves at the center of a paradigm-shifting encounter. A prodigious Zithian named Prismel, a discovery-hungry Nebulon, a timid Dronian called Buzzwick, and an inquisitive crystalline named Xaner. "Settle down, class," came the authoritative voice of Professor Varaxia, a Vorak with 12 appendages that moved with hypnotic grace as she activated the holographic projector. "Today, we discuss the most feared entity in our known galaxy." The room fell silent as a three-dimensional image materialized in the center of the lecture hall. Students gasped, some even retreating in their seats. The hologram depicted a creature of such terrible beauty that it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its body was covered in fur darker than the space between stars, with muscles rippling beneath the surface like liquid mercury. 6 limbs ended in claws that looked capable of tearing through battle-grade armor, and its eyes glowed with an intelligence that sent shivers down multiple species' spines. "The Shadow Moor," Professor Varaxia announced, her voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "Classification: Apex Predator. Origin: Real Prime. Threat level: Absolute." The hologram rotated slowly, revealing more terrifying details. Rows of serrated teeth, sensory organs capable of detecting prey from kilometers away, and a neural structure suggesting problem-solving abilities rivaling those of most sentient species. "The Shadow Moor has been responsible for the destruction of 7 colonial outposts," the professor continued. "It has only been successfully contained 4 times in our recorded history. Each capture required a team of 50 specialists and resulted in multiple casualties." Prismel raised one of her upper limbs, the bioluminescent patterns on her skin pulsing with excitement, despite the terrifying subject. "Professor, is there any evidence suggesting the Shadow Moor can be reasoned with? Or does it behave purely on predatory instinct?" A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the class. The idea of reasoning with the galaxy's most efficient killer seemed absurd. Professor Varaxia adjusted her ocular enhancers. "An interesting question, Prismel. While the Shadow Moor possesses remarkable intelligence, all interactions have ended in violence. It seems to view all other life forms as either threats or prey." Xanor's crystalline body refracted light as he leaned forward. "What about humans?" he asked, his voice resonating with the distinctive chime of his species. "I've read that humans have unusual relationships with predatory species on their home planet." "Humans?" The nebulon beside him dimmed slightly, a sign of anxiety in their species. "What difference would that make? The Shadow Moor has killed everything from quantum engineers to psionic manipulators." Before the professor could respond, the classroom communication system chimed. A message scrolled across the main display. "Special announcement. The biocontainment facility has approved a live observation session of the captive Shadow Moor tomorrow at 0800 station time. Advanced xenozoology students may apply for clearance." The lecture hall erupted into a mixture of excited and terrified exclamations. Professor Varaxia had to extend all 12 of her appendages to restore order. "This is an unprecedented opportunity," she said, once the noise had subsided. "The facility rarely allows visitors, especially students. Those interested must submit their applications immediately and prepare for extensive security protocols." As the class dispersed, Prismel turned to her friends. "We have to go," she said, her skin flashing with determination patterns. "This could be the observational breakthrough of our academic careers." Buzzwick, the Dronian, retreated partially into his protective shell. "Are you insane? That thing has decimated entire settlements. Just being in the same facility is asking for death." "That's why it's called research, not playing it safe," Xander chimed in, his crystalline form vibrating with excitement. "Besides, the containment systems are supposedly impenetrable." The Nebulon, who had introduced himself as Lux earlier in the semester, flickered between visibility and near transparency, a sign of internal conflict. I'm curious, but terrified. The historical records show the Shadow Moor once escaped by melting through 3 layers of quantum-locked barriers. "That was decades ago," Prismel countered, her skin pattern shifting to a confident blue. "Technology has advanced, and don't you want to see if the theories about predator behavior hold true across species boundaries?" As they debated, none of them noticed the human student quietly listening at the edge of their group, a small smile playing across his lips. That evening, the 4 friends gathered in the station's knowledge center, a vast library containing millions of holographic texts. Prismel was methodically reviewing every available record of Shadow Moor encounters, her multiple eyes scanning different texts simultaneously. "Listen to this," she said, projecting a passage into the air. During the Castor 9 incident, the Shadow Moor displayed what observers described as tactical retreat behavior when confronted with multiple threats. This suggests it's not just a mindless killing machine. It evaluates situations and makes decisions. Buzzwick, who had emerged slightly from his shell, clicked his mandibles nervously. "That just makes it more terrifying. It's not just powerful, it's smart." Lux had stabilized his form to a gentle blue glow, focusing on maintaining calm. "I've been researching the containment facility itself," he said. "The security is beyond anything I've ever seen. 17 layers of redundant force fields, molecular recognition scanners, and atmospheric isolation chambers. If anything can hold the Shadow Moor, this facility can." Xanor had been unusually quiet, his crystalline body absorbing and processing information at rates his friends couldn't match. "I've been analyzing the sound recordings from previous encounters," he finally said. "There's something peculiar about the vocalizations. They don't seem random. There's a pattern, almost like a primitive language." They all fell silent, contemplating the implications. If the Shadow Moor was trying to communicate, it changed everything about how the scientific community viewed the creature. "We should prepare our observation equipment," Prismel decided, closing the holographic texts with a gesture. "Xanor, can your crystalline structure record ultra-high-frequency sounds?" "Up to 250 kHz, Xanor confirmed. "I'll tune my resonance chambers tonight." "I'll bring my multispectral scanner," Lux offered, his form brightening with purpose. "It might detect energy patterns not visible to standard observation equipment." Buzzwick sighed, a whistling sound emerging from his shell. "I suppose I'll prepare my analytical augments. If we're going to risk our lives, we might as well gather comprehensive data." The next morning, the station's transport tubes were crowded with anxious students heading toward the biocontainment facility. Located in the outermost ring of the station, the facility was separated from the main areas by multiple security checkpoints. As they approached the first barrier, a stern-looking Zithian security officer greeted them. "Identification and clearance, please," she demanded, her exoskeleton gleaming under the harsh security lights. After scanning their credentials, the officer fixed them with all 4 of her eyes. "I am Dr. Zentra, lead security coordinator for today's observation. Before proceeding, you must understand the risks and sign liability waivers. The Shadow Moor is the most dangerous creature in this quadrant. If containment fails, Survival chances are approximately 0.003%. Several students immediately turned back, their courage failing them. Buzzwick looked like he might join them, retreating further into his shell until only his sensory stalks remained visible. "Come on," Prismel whispered, her skin patterns emitting encouraging pulses. "We've prepared for this." They followed Dr. Zentra through a series of increasingly secure chambers. Each transition required biometric scans, contamination checks, and neural pattern verification to ensure no one was attempting to infiltrate undermine control. A precaution that seemed excessive until they remembered what waited at the end of their journey. "The next chamber contains the observation deck," Dr. Zentra announced, as they approached a massive door of what appeared to be solid neutronium. "Once inside, you will maintain absolute silence. The Shadow Moor has exceptional hearing and becomes agitated by unexpected sounds. The observation window is constructed of transparent aluminium, reinforced with quantum state stabilizers, theoretically impenetrable. But we take no chances." The door slid open with a barely audible hiss, revealing a darkened room with a massive viewport dominating one wall. Beyond the viewport lay what appeared to be a section of alien jungle, meticulously recreated to mimic the environment of real Prime. Dense vegetation, most of it sporting wicked-looking thorns or dripping with suspicious fluids, covered most of the visible area. "Where is it?" whispered a Quarian student, their tendrils quivering with tension. Dr. Zentra pointed to a particularly dark patch of shadow beneath a massive fern-like plant. "It knows we're here. It always knows." As if on cue, the shadow moved, not quickly, but with deliberate, fluid grace that spoke of absolute confidence. The Shadow Moor emerged into a shaft of artificial sunlight, its midnight black fur absorbing the light so completely that it appeared like a mobile void in the shape of a predator. Beside Prismal, Lux dimmed to near invisibility, a Nebulon's instinctive response to extreme fear. Buzzwick had fully retreated into his shell, which had sealed shut with an audible click. Even Xaner, whose crystalline form was theoretically incapable of expressing emotion, had taken on a cloudy appearance that suggested deep disturbance. The Shadow Moor moved closer to the viewport, its 6 limbs moving in perfect, hypnotic synchrony. Up close, its features became clearer and more terrifying. Its eyes weren't just glowing, they seemed to contain galaxies of their own, swirling with intelligence and ancient hunger. The musculature beneath its dark pelt rippled with each movement, suggesting strength that could tear through starship hulls. Dr. Zentra began a clinical description. Adult specimen, approximately 200 standard years old. 6 limbs with retractable claws, capable of puncturing Duralloy 5 armor. Sensory organs can detect pheromones at concentrations of 1 part per billion. Maximum recorded speed, 180 kilometers per hour in short bursts. Observed killing methods include dismemberment, crushing, and a unique technique where it... What if a human approached it? The interruption came from behind them, a calm voice that seemed strangely out of place amid the tension. Everyone turned to see a young human male standing at the back of the observation deck. He wore the standard Institute uniform, but with the subtle modifications that marked him as a transfer student from Earth. "Pardon me?" Dr. Zentra's tone suggested that interruptions were not tolerated in her facility. "I asked what would happen if a human approached the Shadow Moor," the human repeated, stepping forward. "Has anyone ever tried a direct, non-threatening approach?" Several students gasped. A few laughed nervously, assuming this was some bizarre human joke. Prismel, however, studied the human with newfound interest. "That would be suicide," Dr. Zentra stated flatly. "The Shadow Moor does not distinguish between species. It has killed humans before, along with representatives of nearly every sentient race." The human nodded thoughtfully. "But those encounters were likely defensive or during hunting. Has anyone ever approached one calmly, without weapons or hostile intent?" "Are you suggesting," Dr. Zentra began, but was interrupted by a communication on her personal device. She listened for a moment, her exoskeleton changing color in what appeared to be shock. "This is highly irregular," she muttered, before addressing the group again. "It seems we have a special research demonstration scheduled today," she announced, her professional demeanor barely concealing her discomfort. "This human, Marcus Johnson of Earth, has been approved by the Institute's research board to attempt communication with the Shadow Moor." The observation deck erupted into chaos. Students shouted questions, objections, and in a few cases, insults at the apparently suicidal human. Buzzwick's shell had sealed so tightly that his life sign monitor began beeping in concern. Lux had dimmed to the point where he was barely visible, resembling a black hole more than a nebulon. Prismal's skin patterns were flashing in distress signals so rapid they nearly caused seizures in photosensitive species. "Are you insane?" demanded a Tricarian student, all three of her heads speaking in unison. "That thing will tear you apart before you can even speak." Marcus remained calm, his expression serene. "Perhaps, but we'll never advance our understanding if we remain paralyzed by fear. The Shadow Moor is intelligent. That much is clear from its behavior. Intelligence suggests the possibility of communication." "Communication?" spluttered another student. "It communicates through disembowelment." Dr. Zentra raised all four of her upper limbs for silence. "The decision has been made at levels above mine," she said, though her tone suggested deep disagreement. "Security protocols have been modified to allow this experiment." She turned to Marcus. "The containment field will be temporarily adjusted to allow your entry. At the first sign of aggression from the specimen, we will extract you, or what remains of you." Marcus nodded, seemingly unperturbed by the clinical discussion of his potential dismemberment. He turned to address the still stunned students. "I believe that fear creates barriers to understanding. The Shadow Moor may be dangerous, yes, but so is ignorance. We've been studying this species for decades with the same approach, observation from safe distance, and learned little. Sometimes, a new perspective is required." As he spoke, Prismel found herself strangely moved. The human's calm confidence reminded her of ancient Zithian philosophers who willingly faced death to uncover truths. Beside her, Xanar's crystalline form had cleared somewhat, vibrating at a frequency that suggested intense curiosity. "The preparation chamber is this way," Dr. Zentra instructed, leading Marcus toward a small airlock adjacent to the observation room. "You will need to be decontaminated before entering the habitat. We don't want the Shadow Moor's behavior influenced by unfamiliar scents." As Marcus followed the security officer, he glanced back at the group of students. "Remember," he said with a small smile, "observation isn't just about seeing, it's about understanding." The next 15 minutes were some of the most tense the young xenozoologists had ever experienced. They watched as Marcus underwent an intensive decontamination procedure, visible through a small viewport in the preparation chamber. Rather than donning protective gear, as most researchers would, he emerged wearing only a simple Institute jumpsuit. "He's not even wearing armor," whispered Lux, who had reappeared enough to speak. "This isn't research, it's suicide." Dr. Zentra returned to the observation deck, her exoskeleton now a pale shade of anxiety. "The subject has declined all protective equipment and weaponry," she announced. "He has also refused emergency transponder implantation, citing concerns about altering the Shadow Moor's perception." "Did he at least accept a neural recorder?" asked Xanar. "If he's going to die, we should at least get the data." "Negative," Dr. Zentra replied. "He claims electronic devices might interfere with potential communication." A hushed silence fell over the observation deck as an interior door in the habitat slid open. Marcus stepped through calmly, his movements deliberate but relaxed. The door sealed behind him with a finality that made several students flinch. Inside the habitat, Marcus paused, taking in his surroundings with apparent fascination rather than fear. The recreated jungle of real prime surrounded him. Humid air, thick with the sense of alien vegetation. The lighting was dim, filtered through the dense canopy of bioluminescent plants that cast an eerie blue-green glow across the scene. The Shadowmoor was nowhere to be seen. Where did it go? Buswick had emerged just enough to speak, his voice muffled by his partially open shell. "It's watching," Prismel whispered, her skin patterns shifting to detection mode, enhancing her already superior vision. There, in the shadows by the rock formation. Indeed. A deeper darkness lurked among the stones. So still, it might have been mistaken for an absence of light, rather than a living creature. Marcus seemed unaware, or unconcerned, as he walked further into the habitat, his gait smooth and unthreatening. He stopped in a small clearing, then did something that caused several students to gasp in disbelief. He sat down cross-legged on the ground, completely vulnerable, and closed his eyes. "What is he doing?" hissed Lux. "He's making himself an easier target." Dr. Zentra's fingers hovered over the emergency extraction controls. "Preparing for immediate retrieval," she muttered, her professional demeanor cracking under the strain. For long moments, nothing happened. Marcus remained perfectly still, his breathing deep and regular. The hidden Shadowmoor made no movement, though everyone watching knew it was aware of the intruder in its territory. Then, with a fluid grace that belied its massive size, the Shadowmoor emerged from its hiding place. It moved silently, 6 limbs flowing like liquid midnight across the habitat floor. Its eyes locked onto the sitting human, glowing with predatory intelligence. Prismal began a silent prayer to the Zithian ancestors. Buswick's shell sealed completely shut again. Lux faded to near total transparency. The Shadowmoor circled Marcus once, twice, its movements deliberate and calculating. It sniffed the air, head tilting as it processed the unfamiliar scent. Then it stopped directly in front of the human, close enough that its breath would disturb his hair. Marcus opened his eyes. "Hello there, friend," he said quietly, his voice barely audible through the observation room's audio pickups. The Shadowmoor tensed, muscles coiling beneath its midnight fur. Every student watching knew what would come next. The lightning-fast strike, the terrible claws, the end of the foolish human. But it didn't happen. Instead, the Shadowmoor did something no one had ever observed before. It took a step backward. The collective gasp from the observation deck might have been heard through the habitat walls if they weren't soundproofed. The Shadowmoor, terror of the galaxy, had retreated from a sitting, unarmed human. "Impossible!" breathed Dr. Zentra. All 4 eyes widened to their fullest extent. "Recording everything," Xander whispered, his crystalline body vibrating at maximum capacity to capture every detail. Inside the habitat, Marcus remained perfectly calm. He slowly, very slowly, raised one hand, palm open. In it was what appeared to be a small piece of synthetic protein compound, standard rations for long-term space travel. "Thought you might be curious," he said to the Shadowmoor, his voice still gentle. "It's not much, but it's a peace offering." The predator's nostrils flared, taking in the scent of the offered food. It lowered its massive head slightly, eyes never leaving Marcus's face, and sniffed at the morsel. Then, to the utter astonishment of everyone watching, it backed up another step and settled into a sitting position that mirrored the human's posture. Prismal felt her respiratory systems falter. The Shadowmoor, the most feared predator in known space, was sitting calmly in front of a human, not attacking, not threatening, sitting. "This defies all recorded behavior patterns," Dr. Zentra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "In 40 years of xenozoological research, I have never..." Inside the habitat, Marcus placed the food on the ground between them and withdrew his hand slowly. "No pressure," he said to the creature. "Just letting you know I come in peace." The Shadowmoor's eyes narrowed. Not in aggression, but what appeared to be consideration. It made a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the observation deck's sensors. "Oh, subharmonic communications," Xanor noted, his crystalline structure resonating in response. "Frequencies below normal hearing range." Marcus nodded, as if he understood. He cleared his throat and produced a similar rumbling sound, though rougher and less modulated than the Shadowmoor's. The effect was immediate and startling. The Shadowmoor's ears perked forward, and it tilted its head in what could only be described as surprise. It responded with another, more complex series of rumbles. "He's communicating with it," Prismal said, her skin patterns flashing with academic excitement that overrode her fear. "Actually communicating!" For the next several minutes, the observation deck watched in stunned silence as Marcus Johnson and the Shadowmoor engaged in what appeared to be conversation. The human would make a sound, gesture, or movement, and the predator would respond in kind. Occasionally, Marcus would shift position slightly, and the Shadowmoor would mirror him with precise accuracy. Eventually, the Shadowmoor leaned forward, and delicately, with more gentleness than seemed possible for such a creature, took the offered food from the ground. It consumed the morsel in a single bite. Then did something truly extraordinary. It extended one of its deadly limbs and placed what appeared to be a small, glowing fungus on the ground before Marcus. "A reciprocal offering," breathed Dr. Zentra. "It's trading with him." Marcus smiled and, after a moment's consideration, picked up the fungus with careful respect. "Thank you," he said simply. He didn't eat it, likely a wise precaution given the unknown biology, but placed it carefully in a sample pouch on his jumpsuit. The Shadowmoor made a sound that, impossibly, resembled satisfaction. After what seemed like both an eternity and a heartbeat, Marcus slowly rose to his feet. The Shadowmoor tensed momentarily, then relaxed as it observed the human's non-threatening movements. "I should go now," Marcus said to the creature. "But I'm grateful for this conversation." He bowed slightly, then backed toward the exit with measured steps. The Shadowmoor watched him go, making no move to follow or attack. As the door slid open behind Marcus, he gave one final rumbling call. The Shadowmoor answered with a similar sound, then turned and melted back into the jungle shadows with liquid grace. The door sealed, and collective breath was released in the observation deck. Students who had been frozen in terror for nearly an hour suddenly found themselves capable of movement again. Some collapsed into their seats, others began talking all at once, voices raised in excitement, disbelief, and scientific curiosity. Prismal found herself weeping, the bioluminescent tears tracking down her skin in patterns of profound emotion. Buzzwick had finally emerged completely from his shell. Eye stalks extended to their full length in astonishment. Lux had regained his normal luminosity, glowing with excitement. Xanor's crystalline form vibrated with the effort of processing all he had recorded. When Marcus entered the observation deck after decontamination, the room fell silent again. He looked exactly as he had before, calm, composed, and entirely unharmed. "That," said Dr. Zentra, breaking the silence, "was either the most foolhardy or the most brilliant xenozoological field study I have ever witnessed." Marcus smiled. "Perhaps a bit of both. The Shadowmoor isn't what we thought. It's intelligent, curious, and capable of restraint. It doesn't attack without reason. It evaluates and decides." "But it's killed hundreds of sentient beings," protested one student. "Yes," Marcus acknowledged. "And I suspect in each case, it perceived a threat or challenge. We've been approaching these creatures with fear and weapons for centuries. They're intelligent enough to recognize hostile intent." Prismel stepped forward, her skin patterns showing respect and curiosity. "How did you know it wouldn't attack you?" "I didn't," Marcus admitted. "But I've studied Earth's apex predators extensively. Many respond to direct eye contact as a challenge, but to submission postures with tolerance. I theorized that the shadow moor, despite its alien biology, might share some universal predator behaviors." "The sitting posture," Xanor chimed in, his crystalline voice resonating with understanding. "You made yourself smaller, less threatening." "Exactly," Marcus nodded. "And I avoided any movements that might be interpreted as aggressive or territorial." "The sounds you made," Lux asked, his form pulsing with curiosity. "How did you know what to say?" Marcus laughed. "I didn't say anything specific. I mimicked the subharmonic frequencies the shadow moor was producing, essentially echoing back its own communication style to establish a connection. On Earth, many animals respond positively to mimicry as a form of social bonding. "You've just revolutionized shadow moor research," Dr. Zentra said, her professional reserve finally breaking. "Decades of study, and no one thought to simply sit with one." "Sometimes the simplest approaches are overlooked," Marcus said, "especially when fear clouds scientific curiosity." As the group dispersed, still buzzing with excitement, Prismal, Buzzwick, Lux, and Xanor gathered around Marcus. The barrier of species difference seemed to have evaporated in the wake of what they had witnessed. "Would you join us for sustenance?" Prismal asked, her skin glowing with friendship patterns. "We have many questions." "And we promise not to back away in fear," added Buzzwick, his shell fully open in a sign of Dronian trust. Marcus smiled. "I'd be honored." In the days that followed, news of the unprecedented Shadow Moor interaction spread throughout the Institute and beyond. The recording Xanor had made became the most accessed file in the Xenozoological database. Classes were filled with discussions of predator psychology across species lines. And a new research initiative was launched to explore non-confrontational approaches to studying dangerous life forms. In the student commons, Prismel sat with her friends, watching as Marcus explained his theories to an eager group of xenozoology students from a dozen worlds. "He's changed everything," she said, her skin patterns reflecting admiration. "Not just about shadow moors, but about how we approach the unknown." "I might even try it myself," Buzzwick declared, though his shell closed slightly at the mere thought. Lux glowed with amusement. "Perhaps start with something less deadly, my friend. A phase viper, perhaps, or a minor moonwraith." Xanor, who had been analyzing his recordings non-stop for days, joined the conversation. "The most significant finding isn't just that the shadow moor didn't attack. It's that it showed curiosity. It wanted to understand the human as much as he wanted to understand it." "That's the true lesson," Prismel agreed, watching as Marcus demonstrated the subharmonic communication technique to the fascinated crowd. "Even the most terrifying creature in the galaxy has the capacity for something beyond hostility, if approached with respect rather than fear." In the biocontainment facility, Dr. Zentra stood before the observation window, watching the shadow moor rest peacefully in a shaft of artificial sunlight. The creature that had haunted the nightmares of 1,000 worlds now seemed almost majestic. "Perhaps," she murmured to herself, "we've been the monsters all along." The shadow moor lifted its head, as if sensing her thoughts, and for a brief moment, their eyes met across the barrier of transparent aluminium. There was intelligence there, ancient and alien, but no longer unfathomable. Dr. Zentra found herself unconsciously mirroring Marcus's gesture, a slight bow of respect. And though it might have been a trick of the light, she could have sworn the shadow moor inclined its head in return. In the heart of the space station, circling a dying star at the edge of the galaxy, something fundamental had changed. The apex predator had shown restraint. The students had witnessed the impossible, and the barriers between understanding and fear had begun, ever so slightly, to dissolve. The universe, vast and terrifying as it was, suddenly seemed a little less hostile and a little more full of possibility.